Hey there, Saturn in Pisces people. So you've got your Saturn return coming up over the next, could be 6 months, might be 18 months, who knows. Over the next year or so, you're likely to have your Saturn return. And I wonder how you're thinking about it. Are you preparing? Are you looking ahead at it? Are you like an ostrich with your head in the sand? Who knows? In this video, I'm going to be looking at 6 different readings. The first 3 are going to be for people who are going through their first Saturn return in Pisces. And then the last 3 are going to be for the second group of people that are going through their second Saturn return in Pisces. Before we get going with the actual readings themselves, and they will be indexed, you'll see the chapters below, so you can easily whiz between them and find the one that's relevant for you. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit around the Saturn return and some of the things that I've learned from it, and also some of the things I was reminded of last night. So last night, you may have already seen. If not, you might want to have a look at it at some other time. But I did a live stream recording with 2 other astrologer friends, and we were looking at our own Saturn return charts, talking about our own Saturn return experience. One of our pals, Kimberly, she's actually had 2 Saturn returns, so she's currently, I think, 63. The first one happens roughly at 29 and a half, and the second one between your 58th and 59th year usually. And so, we all were sharing the overarching themes. And the first thing to really bear in mind with the Saturn return, there's the Saturn in your chart. And so you might want to consider where your Saturn is and what that means. So you guys have all got Saturn in Pisces. And I've done a really long recording on Saturn in Pisces. If you have a look in the Saturn playlist, you'll see it there. Really giving a good description, laying it down, the possibilities and stuff. But it's beyond that. What you want to look at really is a 3-pronged approach. So the first one is to look at the quality of your Saturn in your charts. If you watch yesterday's show, you'll see that my Saturn's really poorly aspected, and it's also retrograde, and it's also in its detriment. It's in the sign of Cancer. It's not happy there in that sign. It's very weak. And as one of, as Jasmina pointed out to me, she was like, flipping heck, of course you had an awful Saturn return. It's in Cancer, it's retrograde, and it's making this awful grand square with 3 of the planets. So, the first thing to do is get really close and understand where your Saturn is positioned in your chart and what patterns are playing into it. Because when Saturn moves around to where it was at the time, place, and date of its birth, it's also going to aspect, like if you're born with Saturn in a conjunction with Mars, for instance, when Saturn comes round, it's also going to make a conjunction with your Mars. If it's in a trine to Venus in your chart, as it comes round, it's going to create a trine to your Venus. So there are possibilities for your life to improve, and also possibilities in your life to be quite challenged. And, Saturn is known as a planet that challenges us. It shows us where we're limited. It shows us where we've got really poor belief systems and limits in place that we've imposed upon ourselves that maybe were coming from someone else, some external authority, but that we've still chosen to put on ourselves. So, Saturn really shows us where we're tied up in knots. I was chatting with my husband earlier about the funny thing about aging, because aging is definitely something associated with Saturn. It's Saturn's also known as Chronos, which is like the god of time, and observing what happens with time. And of course, in that we have aging. So this is very much a rites of passage kind of aspect. This return is huge. It's about the passing away of a time in our life and the moving into another stage. And roughly at the age of 29, 30, yes, we've been a legal adult for a good decade, but we're really coming into our own. As we're coming into the Saturn return, we're shown ways where we're not quite there and that we need to up our game, or maybe just, pull back a little bit. Sometimes we have to pull back from the responsibilities to be able to up our game. So there's lots of different possibilities. So, the first thing is to look at the quality of the Saturn in your chart. I've also got a playlist under the Saturn playlist. I've also got a series of podcasts called Saturn Through the Houses. And if you look through there and see where Saturn was at the time, place, and date of your birth, which house was it in? In my case, it was in my 9th house. For you, it might be your 4th, it might be your 12th. But by understanding where it is right now, that's going to, like where it was at your birth, but also understand if you're coming up to your return, the chances are it's already in that house. But that's going to give you a lot of information. So that's part of this set of readings, and I'll explain how I'm going to do that in a minute. The other thing is to, you've got the Saturn return itself. So Saturn lines up to your chart. But obviously there are other planets involved in this. So, at the time of your Saturn return, is Saturn in its current time in a pattern with other planets? Because if it is in some kind of sacred geometrical pattern, like if it's in a tough square with Uranus, like it has been over the last couple of years, or if it is in a semi-sextile with Pluto, for instance, all of these will have a knock-on effect, because the aspect that it's making to the other planet is going to be aspecting your Saturn. So, that's just two levels that we're looking at it from. So the other way I think we should look at it is over the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 matrices, or like 5 points that I want to touch on with each of these readings, which I think is going to help us. The first one is like what needs to be restructured according to this reading. How much responsibility have I got, and where is it too much, where is it not enough? It's all, I think, about calibration. How can I trust more? Like, where am I being untrusting, and how is the effect of me not trusting impacting my outcome? What am I not facing up to right now? Because this is a really big one with Saturn. If you listen to yesterday's show, you'll see that leading up to mine, and Jasmina talks about it in particular as well, both of us in our Saturn return weren't facing up to things. And we both openly admit that we came to the end of a long-term relationship. I was ill because I couldn't face up to my own emotions. And Jasmina ended up changing her whole business route. And so we had these very strong stories of things that needed to change, because leading up to our Saturn return, there were things that we couldn't quite face. So that's another really big question. And it's interesting because when we were talking to Kimberly, about her second Saturn return and her experiences there, it was very different to her first. Her first was actually quite hilarious. I do recommend you listen to it. And again, that's chaptered, of all the different things that could have happened, it was really hilarious. We were falling about laughing. But in her second Saturn return, it wasn't so much about what wasn't she facing up to, but how was she claiming her power back? How was she not only facing herself and seeing herself, but how was, like, in the viewing of herself, how is she helping others face up to themselves? So it's really important. And then the fifth thing I think we should really look at this from the perspective of is how much authority and power we've got, and what authority and power games we're playing. So yes, by now you've probably got the idea that Saturn returns are quite tricky. They are certainly trickier in your first Saturn return, and there are definite things that you can do to make it easier. And then by the time the second Saturn return comes, you've already gone through your Chiron return, which is a whole nother story. But I mean, that really helps to create, I think, a bigger space of safety, a bigger space of self-acceptance. So as you're going into your second Saturn return, you're really claiming your authority. You're seeing yourself, you're accepting yourself. And it's much more graceful, I think. So let's have a look at these two sets, like the first Saturn return. Like I said, I'm going to look at 3 different readings within it, and then the second Saturn return. Now, one thing I want to share with you is how you can find out the exact moment of your Saturn return. And so I think that's quite a good place to start, because unless you're a whiz at astrology already, and you may well be there. A lot of people who watch me have obviously got loads of knowledge, because I see your comments. That's great. But like, if you're new to astrology, you might want to check out where Saturn is in your chart. So if you go to AstroSeek, so it's astro-seek.com. And then if you go to Astro Tools in the menu bar, and then come down to AstroSeek's tool search, and then you'll get this little menu here, and click on returns. And then once you're in returns, select this option, returns ingresses, returns on a particular degree. Because if you know where Saturn is in your chart, so for instance, I think mine's at 16, 49 in the sign of Cancer. I think Kimberly's was 12 in Capricorn. If you know what your, like for instance, this one we're looking is at 14 degrees 11 in the sign of Pisces. You select the Saturn planet. I mean, you can select any planet here, in fact, but select Saturn for now, and then click which year you want it to start searching from. I'm talking about tropical, the tropical zodiac, not the sidereal one. And then when you click calculate, it will bring up all of the associated Saturn returns for you to have a look at. Now, if you want, you can also click on the chart. So this is the chart, I think, from the second Saturn return here in October 2024. And it shows exactly when Saturn, you can see it here at 14 degrees 11. That's the exact moment where Saturn came back to that point. And so you can see the other aspects that are going on with Saturn. So, you know, Saturn, it's interesting because on the day of the exact Saturn return for this person, it's in a conjunction with the moon, and the moon is in a very fiery conjunction with Mars, all in the sign of Pisces, which is kind of interesting because Mars isn't very happy in the sign of Pisces. So, you know, that in and of itself would be quite an interesting one to look at. But you can look at the patterns that are going on essentially. But this really describes the actual return itself. It doesn't describe how that return is affecting you. And that's where I think, you know, the way I'm approaching it is going to be more helpful for you. So let's have a look now at my suggestions. So I said I'm going to have a look at 3 different returns throughout the sign of Pisces for both the dates within the first Saturn return, people going through their first Saturn return. So people born between 1994 and sort of the end of 1995, I think, maybe the 1996. I'll find out the exact dates in a minute. And then for their second Saturn return, so people born between 64 and 66. Now, what I've done is I've looked for 3 midpoints throughout the sign of Pisces. That if I was to select these midpoints, everything to this side and to that side within the decan, so like these decans, that a decan is essentially 10 degrees within the sign. So we've got these 3 decans, and I'm opting for this point here. So what I've done is I've looked at the whole of the Saturn in Pisces transit, and then I've looked for the exact moment that Saturn in Pisces is at 4.29 degrees in the sign of Pisces, at 14.29 degrees, and at 24.29 degrees. And I've pulled up the charts for that. So for people going through their first Saturn return, that equates to people born on the 7th of March 94, people born on the 1st of March 95, and on the 24th of July 1995. And then I've done the same for people who are going through their second Saturn return. So it's how can I find out the most prevalent patterns of people born in the first 10 degrees of Pisces, the second 10 degrees, and then the third 10 degrees, because the patterns are going to change. And then I'm also looking at the nearest Saturn return date to these people. So I've looked for the exact Saturn return date for 4 degrees 29. You'll see as I get going, but I just wanted to explain why I've selected these particular dates. They're literally like midpoints within this whole range. So if I'm having a look with these people who are going through their first Saturn return, the first example is going to be for people born in and around the 7th of March 1994. The second one will be the 1st of March 1995, when Saturn has moved on a whole 10 degrees. And then finally, the 24th of July 1995, when it's moved on another 10 degrees. Now, the chances are you're not going to be born on one of these days, but you might want to think, okay, which of these dates is closer to my actual date of birth? And you might also, you know, if you're born with your Saturn return around 9 or 10 degrees, you might want to listen to both of these readings, because they'll both have some relevance to you. Or for instance, if you're born around here, you might want to listen to the last Saturn return reading for the first lot of the Pisces guys and the second one. So entirely up to you. But this is to try and get the best without doing a reading for every single degree of the Saturn return, which would obviously take forever. I'm just doing, one per decan. So I hope that makes sense. So the first Saturn, so this is for you guys who are going through your first Saturn return. So you're around about 29 and a half. You're born with Saturn in Pisces around 4 degrees 29. Like I said, it might be 0 degrees, it might be up to 10 degrees, but effectively you're in that decan. Now, with this, I'm really concentrating not on the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, because they're the personal planets and they move quite fast. So, for instance, by the time Saturn gets into its second decan, it's a whole year later. And obviously, the Sun, Moon, Venus, and Mars have all moved all around. So if I include this in this reading, it's not going to be applicable. But what I am looking at are all the positions of the outer planets. So I'm looking, first of all, at Saturn in the Saturn return and what aspects he's making to people born around this time and to their outer planets. And then I'm considering what the transiting outer planets are doing to this birth chart. Okay. So it's a little bit complicated. It's not cut and dried, but it's the best I can do to get you a pretty good Saturn return update. So for people born with their Saturn in Pisces around 4 degrees 30, let's say, so born in and around the 7th of March 1994, what you may well be experiencing has something to do with this opposition, this Saturn return. So the first thing with this Saturn return is, for people born at your time, you're born with Saturn and Chiron in opposition. This is kind of interesting, actually, because people are going through their second Saturn return. It's all those guys born between 64 and 65, 66. They're all born with Saturn and Chiron in a conjunction. To a varying degree. Like some of them, they're right in that tight conjunction. People born in 66 and from midway 65, they've got this really tight conjunction. You guys born, a Saturn return later have actually got your Saturn in opposition, which is kind of interesting. So you've got similar themes of Saturn and Chiron playing out. And I wonder how many people listening in today who are going through their first Saturn return have got a parent going through their second Saturn return. That's often something that occurs. So anyway, first things first, you've got your Saturn return, which is bringing up lots of themes of, where are you being responsible? What do you need to face up to? What can you restructure? What do you need to trust more? Where's your authority and power? But at the same time, you've got Saturn in opposition to Chiron, and that's pretty painful. So the first thing I would say is you're going to have to really dig deep. Saturn and Chiron in opposition is a very painful kind of separation from self. It really feels like at some points, when you take personal authority for things, that you're creating hurt somewhere or hurt is coming in. And when you go to heal yourself, it feels like there is this authority that is against that healing process. It's very much like I guess with all oppositions, they show up as projections. So whether you're identifying really with the Saturn side of this opposition, you'll be projecting Chiron onto the other people in your life. Or if you're identifying more with the Chiron part of this, you're going to be projecting onto the Saturn people in your life. So if you're born at this time, but because of the way your life has panned out, you're feeling more like a victim, feeling quite hurt, feeling quite triggered. Saturn coming in opposition to your Chiron will do that. It can really bring up this opportunity for a very great sense of clearing, a very great sense of healing. And it can be too much. It can feel almost like life is throwing too much away and you can't quite find your way out of it. What you're projecting onto the people in your life is that they're too strong, too powerful, that they're in authority, that they may well be pushing on you to do that healing process yourself. And it might feel like too much. what this is really suggesting to you is it's actually time to stand in your authority. It's time to recognize that seeing yourself as a victim, whilst it may feel true and it might rationally look true, because, you know, if you write down all of your experiences, it may well sound rationally like you're on the back foot. However, it's really essential at this time to also be able to include part of the authority system that appears to be bullying you or being confrontational, judgmental, etc., etc. It's time to embody some of that. With these projections, we are projecting onto people the things that we can't see in ourselves. So the things that we might be in resistance to. So resistance is a very, very strong theme for this particular return for you guys. It's almost like you don't want to be authoritative or powerful because you see it as a sign of pain or corruption. So for instance, like, you know, in your lifetime, you've probably grown up with the weight of the world on your shoulders. Like when I was at school, we didn't really have much to do with environment policies or things like that at school. We certainly didn't learn about the impact that we might have on other people. We certainly didn't bother with things like diversity. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but I recognize that in your generation specifically, you'd have had a lot of that put on you right from word go. You know, the idea that you need to take responsibility for things right from word go, at a time when actually kids need the grown-ups to do the work. They don't need it all foisted upon them. So you may well find that you've got a lot of antipathy and resistance towards anything that you see as being in control, being old, having the power, having the money, having all the structures, using the structures against you because they've got the power. You may be really deeply in resistance to that, especially if you're born on the 7th of March, that you've got Mars right close there as well. I mean, that's a very, very strong energy. At the same time, and this is kind of the paradox of this energy, at the same time, you do have a particular strength and you do have your own natural authority and you can be very strident. And you may also be very upset at people that are playing the victim as well. So this is a very, very strong, who am I playing right now? Who am I being? And, you know, how can I embody both of these? How can I put myself through my own healing process whilst also identifying with being my own authority? So who knows how that's going to play out in your chart? Now, obviously, if your Saturn's in the 4th house, you might well find that there's a lot going on with your parents and in terms of you settling and feeling like you belong in your life and that you've got all your groundwork done. And of course, if that's playing out there, then Chiron's going to be in the 10th. And you may well find that you're giving a lot in the outer world and not doing so much on the inner world. If, for instance, you've got Chiron going through your 7th and Saturn through your 1st, you might be during this time playing so much in the identity of who you are and finding that you're attracting lots of disempowered people. So it's going to be an interesting time for you working between these two energies. Your solar return, so Saturn, is also in a square to Pluto, which is also pretty tricky. I've got Saturn in a square to my Pluto and also in a square to my Chiron. So I've got a bit of a flavor for this in my chart as well. But the square to Pluto can be quite disempowering because Pluto is showing where your need for power resides and also your resistance to power. Like ultimate power, you know, like those unseen powers. Pluto also represents death and dying and what we're letting go of. And of course, with Saturn in resistance to Pluto here, we don't want to let go of anything. You know, we don't want to let anything die. We want to try and manage it so we can keep everything alive all the time. So it's almost like with Saturn in the square to Pluto, we're not allowing things to pass away. We're trying to hold on to things. And one of the most graceful things we can do with this is to allow things to pass. With, you know, your Saturn is also square both the nodes, which is very interesting as well, because the north node is showing the direction you're heading in. The south node is really showing where you're coming from. And so at some point, It feels like you're always trying to manage your present moment, and you're putting a lot of effort in keeping it just so, because the past is in the past, the future's in the future, and it's almost like you can't quite compute that everything that you're doing fluidly moves from one day to another to another to another, and you are always on this movement. So Saturn here is also reminding you that it's time to leave the past in the past, and also have an eye to the future, but not to forget the messages from each of these times, not to get so rigid here that we can't flow and move. And of course, with your North Node and Pluto together, there's something in your energetic makeup that is about transformation in the future. So, there's a big hint at your purpose. What's your life purpose right now? Are you meant to be doing something to transform the world? And if so, how can you remove any pain that's associated with it from this aspect here? So this is very strong as Saturn returns go, and this could be a massive kick up the backside. It could be you absolutely being too hard on yourself, and if you're not prepared to be hard on yourself, you might find that there are other people coming in to do that for you. But actually, what you could really do with doing is being your own friend and not being hard on yourself. If ever there was a time to just relax into it and to examine, where this hardness versus victimhood has come from, and also where this resistance to letting things pass away is coming from. It's almost like a resistance to change, whilst also believing that transformation is what is needed to be happening. Can you see the bind that you might have created for yourself? So there's also that going on, but there's also some other planets that are playing into this pattern. So, for instance, transiting Chiron at this time, which is here, is also square your natal Neptune. There it is. See, there's your natal Neptune, because that's a slow-moving planet that's going to be in that position for quite a few months either side of this date. So you've got this square between Neptune and also Uranus to your North Node and Chiron. So this is really quite interesting. Also during this time, Pluto is very, very close to your Neptune and your Uranus. So as a generation, there's some really big shifts going on for you. So you're born in the generation of Neptune and Uranus working together. So this is, and again, the interpretation will really change according to which house it's placed in. And obviously the position of your moon and your sun will make a difference. But here, with Neptune and Uranus together, you're looking for more and more ways to be authentic and free, which may well involve internet and technological aspirations, may well involve some kind of system that keeps things equal, may well include a dissolution of identity, because Neptune is very good at dissolving who we think we are and putting veils and all sorts of different things between us and the truth. So, we could be searching for the truth and just going through like curtain after curtain after curtain after curtain after curtain. There's hundreds upon thousands of veils that Neptune can put in the way as we're trying to transcend the idea of who we are. And so Uranus is absolutely looking for freedom and clarity, and Neptune's kind of dangle it in front of us. Look, there's this potential freedom for you, this potential identity for you. Let's see. So it's a fascinating aspect that you've got, and it's in the business world. It's in the sign of Capricorn. So you guys have grown up with this idea that you have to create your own jobs. I think that's fairly true as well. And that the most creative and the most daring and the ones who are most happy to work in changing times with no certainty are the ones that are likely to survive this and thrive through it. But this is being really transformed by Pluto. But at the time of your Saturn return, you've also got Chiron really playing into it. So it's asking you to examine whether this tendency that your generation have been born with, where's the pain associated with it? What's the attachment to the pain? And again, where is change causing you pain? Because, the North Node and Chiron and that square to Uranus can be quite painful. Like Uranus is about sudden change and innovation and invention and things moving away quite quickly. And Chiron is about our wounds. So I think this, for you guys born with your Saturn in Pisces in and around 4 degrees, I think this is quite a strong Saturn return. This could be the making of you. And of course, I'm looking at this video from the perspective of, how can we up level our experience? Well, what I want to share with you is to the degree that you can let go of all those patterns of how things should be, and the idealism, which is absolutely put in there with this sort of Neptune energy. The idealism of how things should be is really causing you some massive dissonance, and real pain. And it's almost like you feel like you've got to be the big people to carry the weight on your shoulders and make all the change. And then you're happy to make the change. But when you see other people aren't engaging in the change with you, it's isolating and it's creating this very sort of like angry resistance. So I really think one of the biggest places for you to heal actually is in your expectations in life. So you may find that coming up to the Saturn return, you actually pull back from some of the responsibilities you're taking on and actually take some time for you and to get really clear about what's going on in your life right now, how your creativity is helping you, how it might be hurting you. Is it because you've got these expectations on yourself that you're unwilling to change? Because with Saturn, it limits you. If you've already got limited beliefs, it really crushes you down. Really, what you want to do is give yourself as much space as you can to be able to make another decision. Now, the chances are the weight of your world isn't going to be playing out as a theme, as an overall theme for your Saturn return. It's much more likely that you've got relationship issues, which is, quite normal at the age of 29, or you might realize that you've gone down the wrong road. You might have devoted your whole 20s to one course of action, one direction in your career, and you might be ready for something else. If you're feeling tightness in the identity you've created for yourself, it's time to gather up the lessons that you've learned, realize what you've learned from this whole experience. It won't have been in vain. You might have gone down one route and it might not have gone the way you were hoping, but you may well find that as you explore it, you realize actually, well, from that, I got some structure. I met these people. I learned what I don't want. There'll be a lot of hidden lessons in there that help you know where you're going. I often think that when we get a harder lesson, it's much easier to see it for what it is and actually be able to respond to it. One other thing that I really would advise for you guys at the early stage of this Saturn in Pisces return is to watch your mental health. Now, obviously, mental health is something that's spoken about a lot, but Saturn in Pisces is quite difficult. The sign of Pisces does have quite a reputation, especially with their squares going into it, and oppositions going into it for sort of mental health imbalance, because you want to serve people, you also feel it all. And with Saturn there, you can be pessimistic. Saturn in Pisces can really it can do wonderful things in Pisces. It can stabilize the beautiful romance of life and spirituality. But if you aren't grounded, Saturn in the sign of Pisces can wear you down with indecision and kind of regrets and guilt and all these kind of slightly wetter victim-y emotions. So I would also, if I was in your shoes, leading up to this, is just get really, really clear about what's going on in my mental health and find the most dynamic but accepting mentors. You don't want someone that's going to come on and tell you you're wrong or kind of feel like you're being bullied, because that's going to set off this dynamic, which is likely to have you running for the hills and therefore just getting more into your patterns. But if you can find somebody around you who feels like they'll talk to you straight, but with a lot of empathy, they'll be able to see where you're coming from, and kind of be like a guide by your side. That's really what you're looking for. If you've got that guide by your side, you can do it. You know, you can face yourself. But I think this is one of the challenges. So anyway, you know, they are quite difficult, but this is all here to help move you on. This is all here to change your life in such a way that you're ready to start to fulfill some of the promise in your chart. And there's a lot there. There's so much there. I mean, your generation is really here to move and shake and really change the way this world is going. So there you go. I hope that's helpful. Let's have a look now at people going through Saturn in Pisces who are born with Saturn in the middle of the month. Now, this is much easier. So right from word go, you can see that the quality of Saturn in this chart, yes, it's in an opposition to Chiron, but it's a much wider opposition. So the last one was really quite exact. If I just flick back, you'll see that, you know, Saturn's at 4 degrees, Chiron is at 5 degrees in the opposing sign. So it's 179 degrees away from each other. Now we've got a wider orb, you know, there's more wriggle room out of this opposition. So it's still playing there, but it's not so deep. It's not cutting so deep. And then some of these square energies that you had before to the nodes and Pluto is different. So now your Saturn challenge, just because you're born a year later and your Saturn has moved on, you know, an extra 10 degrees, the other planets or the outer planets have moved into a slightly different lineup. So you no longer have Saturn in a square to Pluto. Pluto's in a square to the moon and the sun. And like I said, I'm not looking at these guys in this reading, but Saturn is in a square to Jupiter. So there are some similar themes to before. However, the biggest challenge for you isn't on resistance and holding on to things. Now the picture has really changed in as much as the square between Saturn and Jupiter is challenging you to inch forwards. So it's like every time you expand, you need to put a new control in place. Then you expand a little bit more and there's a little bit more control, and you expand more, there's more control. So it's like a dance. You're not resisting change. And that's one of the beauties of this aspect, is you're not resisting change and you're not galloping off into the future. You know, you're not one of these really fast movers that dreams big and makes things happen, but doesn't put the necessary architecture in place. You're actually quite cautious, even though these are in going through the signs of Pisces and Sagittarius. The difference here is that you've got something that's building up at the same time. So your thoughtfulness about life and the structures of life and your part that you're playing in this world is offset by this kind of optimistic growth. So you're not completely dampened. You know, you're not allowing the weight of the world to dampen you. You can see a way forwards. And so at the time of your Saturn return, yes, it's in opposition to your Chiron. And what I would say is, as your Saturn return starts and then continues for the next 6 months or so, it's still operational, because that Saturn is still going to be moving in. It's very much moving closer into an opposition to Chiron. So you may well find that some of the things that loosen up in your chart around the time of the Saturn return then start to sting a little bit later, you know, maybe for another 6 months, maybe for another 9 months. So that's something to bear in mind. You know, the first change that you're making around the Saturn return, it might feel very empowering at first. And the important thing for you to do is to sense what might be coming, but do something proactive to take out any potential sting. So for instance, you know, if you split from a partner, you know, as Saturn's moving into the opposition of Chiron more fully, you may well find that that partner partners up with somebody else straight away, and that sting starts. So yes, you're free of that limiting relationship, but that your emotions are still playing out, you know. So, or it might be you end a job and you're starting a new one and it feels great, but there's the sting of needing to start over again with your finances. So just watch out for that sting, and do whatever you can, take whatever action you need to be able to know it's a possibility that it may be coming, and to have the mental wherewithal to understand it, so it's like how to take the ouch out of starting over again. But with Saturn, at this time, the lovely square that you've got to Jupiter, which can create frustration, the real key here is to take it step by step, to understand that what's really happening for you is you've got an opportunity to start again. And unlike in your 20s, where you may have got off to a good start and you started really running down the road, the real message here is to take it slowly. Don't be in a rush. Just take it slow and review every gain, review every new step that you've done and see, is this working for me? And if it isn't, take action straight away. Don't let it linger. Just kind of be fearless and courageous and in your own authority to know if something's not working, it's time to reroute. Remember, if you're driving a car, which I'm guessing most of you will ride something, or even a bike, if you're already moving and you turn your steering wheel, your bike or your car will move. It will change direction quite easily. But if you're in a stationary car and you turn your steering wheel, nothing happens. So you have to be moving to be able to change direction. That's really important. So as you realize you're not in the right direction, don't stop moving, just change direction. Don't stop the flow, allow it to go and be, slow but sure. So that's the main observation about your Saturn return, I would say. But also happening at the same time is you've got Pluto right over your natal Uranus, and that's meant to read Neptune. So at the time of your Saturn return, I actually think the most important thing that's going on is that you've got Pluto over your Uranus, like right over there, and it's also very close to Neptune. Now, thankfully, the Pluto-Neptune thing is probably long gone now. You felt the energy of it. It's brought in some confusion. You may have had some depression in the last couple of years. You may have got the other side of it. But Pluto in a conjunction with Uranus is interesting. In fact, the people who are going through their second Saturn return, that I'll be talking to shortly in the video, they were actually born with Pluto and Uranus together. So they've got a very interesting power makeup, because Pluto is about the power we take and own and claim. And Uranus is very much about where we cut away from things, where we avoid things, where we run away from things, and also where we start new opportunities, and where we're always moving. So this energy here is really saying when there's pain and difficulty, we want to move, and we want to move fast. So here, I think the challenge for you is, yes, you might be moving away from the pain represented here with Chiron, and you might want to move very fast and make those deep changes, but it's really important to do it slowly but surely. If you're doing the big pain reaction with Pluto over your Uranus, chances are you might actually wreck something. You might choose to eradicate something because of power imbalances. Like you maybe don't feel powerful, and so you're not really allowing yourself to feel vulnerable. I think with this, feeling your true vulnerable feelings and being able to acknowledge them will actually enable you to make a much more wise and intelligent decision at the time of your Saturn return. Here we've also got Uranus transiting your Pluto. So it's interesting that you've got Pluto conjunct your Uranus, and then you're transiting Uranus in opposition to your natal Pluto. So you've got Uranus and Pluto playing out twice. So, if you have got, your parents, if they are going through their second Saturn return at this time, you may well find yourself taking some actions that they themselves took, ironically, in the past. So, you might have grown up the child of separated parents, because people born 64 to 66 are some of the forerunners of interesting new types of families. The Pluto and Uranus signature here is when it feels heavy, when it feels controlling, when it feels too much, when there's when you don't feel in your power, it's time to run. It's time to get freedom. It's time to create space. So you may well find that you create massive amounts of space for yourself because it's painful to face something. So again, in preparation for this, anywhere where you're feeling like things are too tight and you don't have enough freedom, start working on it now so that you don't take a massive sledgehammer to your life later on around the time of the Saturn return, because that wouldn't be in your interest. It really, really wouldn't. And, you know, for you guys, this Saturn return is happening on the 29th of September 2024. So, you know, I'm recording this in December 2023. You've got 9 months to really think, okay, where am I feeling tight? Where am I feeling really controlled? Where am I actually feeling like I want to run? If you've got that feeling like you want to run and like run for the hills and escape and whatnot, then that is the feeling that you need to work with. Like, why is that happening? What has happened earlier on that has created that response in you? And if you can unpack it a little bit safely with people that you trust, or just, you know, if you've got the presence of mind to do it yourself, which many of you do. I mean, you guys have got incredible birth charts. If you're able to get some sense of peace around that fight or flight, which I think is really strong in your makeup, you can use the power of this to create something really transformational. Rather than running away in this fight or flight, you can think, okay, I've got this chance to build something really wild. I've got this chance to build something really liberating. I've got this chance to do something that's going to transform things. But of course, you know, what meaningful thing can you create and transform that might have long-lasting influence when you're on the run? It's much harder to do things when your structures aren't stable. I mean, it can give you a much more elevated opportunity to see life, but it doesn't necessarily give you the grounds to be able to root an idea and grow it. So really think in terms of that. And of course, something else to just put into the mix is in this year ahead, and I will be talking about this in other videos, we are going to have the Uranus and Jupiter conjunction in April, which could really give you this great and bright idea earlier on. So, you know, whatever dynamic ideas are coming to you, start working on them, but in a way that allows you to root them rather than run from them because they've turned into a nightmare. So anyway, I hope that was helpful for you, for those guys born you know, with their Saturn in Pisces around the 14-degree mark. So on to the last of our first Saturn return people. So the point I'm looking at here is for people born in and around the 24th of July, 1995. That's my midpoint. And for you guys, you've got your Saturn firmly at 24 degrees, in the sign of Pisces. And you'll see again, there's a really different pattern going on here. So I just want to show you what's really playing out. And there's a lot of blue and red lines. There's a lot of sacred geometry here, as you can see. And if we flick back, you know, people born with the Saturn in Pisces in the midpoint here have a much clearer chart to work with. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, your Saturn return is in a really tight connection to Chiron. So very much like in the first part of the Saturn return, you know, when Saturn was at 4 degrees, it was just 1 degree difference in opposition to Chiron. That's back on again. So, you know, with the forward motions of Chiron and Saturn, and then with their retrograde motions of Chiron and Saturn, they have gone back into a really sharp and painful and interesting opposition that's playing out. So a lot of the advice that I'm going to give or would give, I've given in the first part. So I think you should really listen to the first part of this because some of that is relevant to you. The next thing that I think is worth bearing in mind, and this is really nice. So the solar return is in a trine to Pluto. So, you know, for you guys, you're born with this very transforming possibility that the previous two Saturn in Pisces people don't really have as strongly. Like, for instance, when you set your mind to do something, you've got the confidence and congruence to really get things done. Even if there's a certain amount of pain that you are suffering from, it's almost like you've got this ability to work beyond the pain and to transform. It's almost like it's going to happen, and so nothing stops you. You are absolutely working in a particular direction, and that's what's going to happen. It's like that knowing, that really deep knowing. Now, obviously, as Saturn goes into the Saturn return, it's making that trine to your natal Pluto, and according to where your Saturn is, that's going to be happening more or less, but it's going to be in that trine. It's a very, very powerful energy. So this is great. You could be building castles, definitely. And then the other thing that I really notice here is that we've got Saturn. Your birth Saturn is also in this beautiful sextile to Neptune, and also a beautiful sextile to Uranus. Now, Pluto is still in the environment of these guys, but has moved off. So your Neptune and your Uranus energy is actually really freely available to be used without any kind of power interference from Pluto. So this, even though you're going through your Saturn return and it's bringing up some old hurts and pains from the past, actually what's also going on is you're able to access your creativity in quite a magical way. And also you're able to make change in a really exciting way. You're quite playful with doing things in an inventive way. You don't feel like you're being pinned down to any particular convention. So you've got this really tight laser-like focus to achieving something, but it almost doesn't feel like it's coming from somebody else. It feels like you're in control. And you can have fun doing it. You can be creative. It's really quite delightful. So this Saturn return, yes, it's stirring a lot of things, but actually what it's doing is creating a sense of action. Like it's time to really take action on the big plans, on the big creativity, on the big social change, maybe. You guys might be dreaming something really, really big right now. So I think this is quite exciting. Other things that are going on, it's quite busy here. You've also got transiting Neptune, which is also in a conjunction to Saturn. So it's interesting. You've got Saturn sextile Neptune. You've also got Neptune conjunct Saturn. So both Saturn and Neptune energies are working together. Well, Neptune is creative. It's freeing. It's bringing in a higher dimension of love. Yes, it creates confusion, but it also creates dreams. And a greater flowing, imaginal kind of self. It's very spiritual. So like the combination of Neptune and Saturn is almost like Saturn in Pisces. It's like the spiritual and the stable. So it's like, how are you stabilizing your spirituality? And how are you making it quite fun and accessible to people? You have this a way of integrating your spiritual self into your maturing psyche, which I think is a really fantastic possibility. But if you do have a tendency to be overwhelmed by things, if other factors in your chart are showing that you can get overwhelmed, then the Neptune and Saturn could be, showing where you use habits to ease off some of the tension. Neptune, when it's poorly aspected, can bring on things like nervousness, depression. Saturn and Neptune in a difficult position could really trigger some kind of depressive energy state. So it's really important to see what's already going on, what's already manifesting, and if you have a tendency for that, to take action now. And if you have these delightful spiritual values that you see being integrated in your life, this is a real thumbs up to say, yes, this is the time to go forwards with it. If you've got these plans and you never know when the right time is, this is the right time for you. The other thing is Uranus is still in opposition to Pluto. So the fight or flight energy is still playing out, but not as much for the people that came before. So out of all the Saturn in Pisces returns for people going through their first Saturn return, I think people towards the latter side of Saturn in Pisces fare slightly better. That's not to say that you can't go through change, wherever you are on this Saturn in Pisces conundrum, but it seems very hard on the people early on with their Saturn in Pisces, and much easier and more creative and spontaneous for the people born towards the end. The more central you are in the middle, the more of each of these patterns you're picking up on. But each of these three positions for the first Saturn return in Pisces has a bit of a character, has a bit of a flavor. And of course, taking all of these resources and translating them into your own chart should give you a really good plan. And if you want me to unpack this, then please just see in the links below. If you want to book a consultation, just click on the link and book it in, and we can work on this directly. So you have support. If I feel like the right person for you, I'm here. Okay. So that's the end of the Saturn in Pisces first return. So for people born between 94 and 96, this is the pattern that's likely to be playing out. So I'm moving on to the second Saturn return people. So these are for the people born between 1964, early on in 1964 to the end of 1966, maybe even into 1967. So I found three charts that represent the energy of the Saturn return at 4 degrees, the Saturn return at 14 degrees, and the Saturn return at 24 degrees to give a really good spectrum of, what's playing out for you. Look for the timing that works best for you. So, if you're born and your Saturn is, say at 9 or 10 degrees, you might want to listen to both of these readings. And if it's at 19 to 20 degrees, you might want to listen to both of these readings because there's going to be some overlap. In actual fact, having just recorded the first Saturn return, I actually think it's worth listening to all three, even if, you're in the second batch or the third batch, because there are some patterns that are repeating and showing up in each of your charts. So it's worth listening to all three, but really zero in on the bit that's relevant for you. So the first one that I'm going to be looking at is for people born on the 11th of July, 1964, in and around that date. So that captures all people with Saturn in Pisces up until 9 or 10 degrees. I will say right at the start with this second Saturn return lot, you guys have got incredible charts. You've got a very interesting set of patterns at birth. In particular, people from mid 65 to the end of 66, you've got the absolute pinnacle of tightness and interest from your conjunction between Pluto and Uranus, and then your opposition that you've got with Saturn and Chiron. It's really, really strong. So this is all going to be played out with your Saturn return, no matter which of these sections you're in. So if you start listening here, this should tell you the whole story. So let's start. So for people born at the start of the Saturn in Pisces, and you've got your Saturn in Pisces around 4 degrees, 4 and 5 degrees, like the outer planets in your chart are pretty extreme. Okay, so you've got Pluto and Uranus in a conjunction. I will also say, actually, before I get going, if you've got children that came around the time of your Saturn return, they are also going through their Saturn return right now. So it is worth checking in. It is worth considering that whilst you're going through this, they're going through something. And they have got a very similar and opposite planet pattern to you. So whilst you're born with this Pluto-Uranus energy that I'm going to talk about in a minute, people that are going through their first Saturn return are going through a series of Pluto-Uranus oppositions, which is playing out. So the fight or flight energy that you've got is showing up in the 29-year-olds right now, 29, 30-year-olds. You've also got, now this isn't really showing up so much in your chart right now. The subsequent charts, like from the middle Saturn in Pisces people to the end Saturn in Pisces people, they've also got this Saturn and Chiron opposite conjunction in opposition to this. So you can see how it's playing out. It's like this great big cosmic seesaw of projections and different things playing out. But right now, at the time you're born, you've got Saturn in Pisces. You've also got Chiron in Pisces. There's a good distance between them, but they are both reacting to this conjunction down here. So you can see your Saturn is in opposition to both Uranus and Pluto, and your Chiron is also in opposition to Pluto. So this is a very, very strong energetic, and it'll be really interesting for you to see which house it plays out in your chart. So which polarity is it, your first and seventh, second and eighth, and so on and so forth, because you're going to have a lot of stuff going on. This Saturn return, as it comes round, it's not just connecting to your Saturn, but it's also connecting to your Pluto, connecting to your Uranus, and creating these really big shifts in consciousness that could be quite shocking, quite surprising. And you'll be going through these changes and you won't necessarily know the impact that that's having on the people around you, because obviously everything in opposition is having a reaction and, on the people around you. So it's fascinating. You are going through your change and also being a catalyst for change, which is one of the signatures of people born at this time. As you go through your changes, you are changing the consciousness around you. It's huge. So that's my first observation, is this is a very interesting Saturn return. Other Saturn returns might have been a bit more calm, might have been a bit more easy. But because of the time when you were born, this is going to change a lot of things for you. And this is a time of cutting away. Like if you think Saturn returns are, and I said, earlier at the start of this, that the second Saturn return is about claiming your power. It's not necessarily about being in resistance. And anywhere where you realize you are still in resistance in your life, it's time to let that go. And to, learn to accept the things that appear to be here. Don't fight it. Like if you're fighting life, you're going to lose because, life is always going to win. Anytime you're trying to control something or control another person, it's not going to work, so it's, one of the key words here I would say is pick your battles, know which ones to work with, and to be in acceptance. And then something that's really, really big that you're in resistance to, it's time to just let that go. And if you can't let that go, then actually make some change. But one of the dangers here is if you're not doing this very consciously, you could just, do the flight. So, you could flee the scene of dysfunction. So, it's important to get very clear about what's going on. Other things that your Saturn return is impacting is the North Node here and the South Node. Now, this is really helpful because what's really showing here is that this Saturn return is here to get you back on track. It's not here to take you off track. What's occurring right now is putting you on the path to where you always know you should have been, and you might have strayed off. But this is like you getting back onto your path and feeling like, oh, hello, old friend, I know you. This is where I'm home. So I love this. Also, what's going on is you've got Neptune squaring the natal nodes. Now, this is interesting because it's creating a sense of dream. It could be it could create a lot of dream work situations, where you could use meditation and healing techniques to free yourself from something quite karmic. But it could also show where you could disappear up your own arse or navel gaze a bit too much and kind of deceive yourself. So it's important to really keep a clear vision. So Neptune here might create a bit of subterfuge. So, you might want to watch out, like who's deceiving you right now. Is it you deceiving yourself? Like, where are you not facing your truth? Where are you allowing things to show up as colors and flowers and feathers and stuff rather than really seeing things as they are? So, Saturn here is really encouraging you to see things as they are, even if they feel painful. It's important to see it as it's showing up. And then you've also got Uranus in opposition to Neptune. So your Neptune is here, and Uranus is in opposition to it. It's also, if you're born exactly at this time, it's also right on your Jupiter, which is really quite beneficial because it's creating this great opportunity, a surprising opportunity. There's great opportunity for sudden growth. And in that sudden growth, you might have a realization about something from the past, could create a lot of connectivity for you. So there's quite a few themes here. And like one of them is the spiritual theme, like where is your spiritual development working for you? And also, where are you deceiving yourself in that? But also, how can you move quite fast and in quite a strong way to find greater levels of peace? So what I would say is for people who are already feeling the Saturn in Pisces coming on, is to get into your peaceful state right now. And if you're already doing it, well done you, because you're already intuiting what's going on for you. But what I would add is Saturn here is working in an opposition to your Pluto and Uranus. And one of the energy patterns that is kind of sewn into your birth chart is the partnering, with Saturn in opposition to Pluto, there's a real resistance to power. There's a real resistance to authority. There's a real resistance to anything that seeks to be or seems to be telling you what to do or putting its thumb over you and saying, well, there you go. This is you under here. There's this very strong resistance. And then with Saturn in opposition to Uranus, there's this, it's like a big finger up at anything that is seeking to control you. And then if you also play in the fact that you've got these Chiron oppositions to Pluto and Uranus, there's also pain associated with staying under the power of somebody. And also there is pain associated with the sudden breaks and the sudden splits. And Chiron really shows us where we get our wisdom. But really here in this chart, it's showing the wisdom comes from all these breaks. But is that a wise way of achieving wisdom? Is there another way of achieving wisdom that doesn't mean you have to pull your life apart so suddenly and then make sense of it? Is there another way? So at the time of your Saturn return, I would really, if you're already feeling this need for spiritual freedom, which is not a bad thing, not by a long shot, if you're already feeling this greater need for peace and a greater need to stand in your peace and demonstrate your peace, how can you do it in such a way that you're not creating pain for yourself further down the line? Well, I guess what I'm suggesting is you don't have to destroy your life to be able to understand what pain has been playing. You don't have to be making these rash decisions and like conflicting and confronting decisions. So yeah, there's quite a few things playing out. Now, as we move on to this next one for people born in and around the 28th of August, 1965, it's even tighter. You'll see the difference between these two charts. This has got a little bit more space, and this one's tighter. And then when we go into the next one, you can see it's even tighter still. I mean, that's very, that could be very liberating, and it could also feel very intense. So, for people born around the 28th of August, 1965, with their Saturn in Pisces roughly at 14 degrees, their Saturn return is also in a conjunction with their Chiron. So it's bringing up old wounds from the past. So again, it's worth working out, what feels painful way in advance to your Saturn return. It's worth, when you feel triggered about something, rather than just thinking, okay, well, that's triggering. That's just normal. No, it might not be normal. It might come from, some dysfunctional belief that you've had since childhood, that everything runs this way. Anytime you're noticing some tightness or difficulty, take a moment and see where it might exist within you. It's not, because you've got these oppositions. It just looks like everything that is painful is coming from other people. It's, where your pain is here, in your makeup, it's coming from an outside authority source that claims itself as its ultimate power, like it's Pluto. It's like that indomitable force that you cannot stop. It's like that untiring force that is never going to let you go. And it feels like hell, and Pluto is there to like the thing with Pluto, I think, is that Pluto just wants you to surrender and allow yourself to flow. But there's a bit of a Pluto and Uranus fight going on here with Saturn and Chiron. It's difficult. So what I would say is, where you feel this like sense of pain that's coming from another direction, and that seems really forceful and really angry and possibly very dark and possibly very confronting, and possibly very aggressive, you might also want to see where that's actually in you, but you're not seeing it in you, because it's very easy for you to manage your hurt state when you're projecting it onto everybody else. And you might project it onto everyone else via the Pluto, which is the anger and the annoyance and the control and the power, which feels like you're being eaten alive and like there's nothing left of you. Or you might be projecting that onto people who are acting out of character, like, the Uranian way, which might create this sense of needing to vacate, break, split, move, change, transform, create disruption around you so that nothing actually gets resolved, move quickly, be fleet of foot all the time. And it's an interesting one because, Pluto and Uranus here are giving you vehicles to get out of your pain, but it's not actually ever getting to the root cause of the pain. So as Saturn comes around in his Saturn return, my invitation to you is to look at something that's painful, and rather than being fleet of foot and creative and creating lots of distractions and interference patterns so you don't see it, or, don't put it all onto someone else, don't project it all onto somebody else that's being that force or power, but actually look inside and say, okay, this isn't working. And it's the Chiron wound here is really pretty strong. Saturn and Chiron together is really difficult. Saturn represents our authority figures, our parents, our school, the police, the hospital. Anyone that's in authority has created pain at some level, or the effects of authority have somehow kind of like pushed you down, and then you feel like the push from outside powers that you can't necessarily see, represented by Pluto, and then there's this Uranian need for truth and freedom that makes you just bust out. So all of these energies are just absolutely emphasized with Saturn going over this point. And so I really invite you to find freedom from the original pain, rather than find freedom through the distraction and the projection. Really actually face that pain, face it square on. But this pain here is a childhood wound. It's a childhood wound that's playing out again and again and again and again. And every time you get close to it, because of these oppositions, it's just dancing around. It's not getting transformed. It's getting hidden, squashed, avoided. But it's there to look at. Also, during this time, Jupiter is really close. So your Jupiter return is happening at the same time, which is really exciting. And so, yes, I've been talking about the mechanics of this interesting pattern that you have from birth. But, you know, and I've hinted at the fact that, you know, you guys use distraction really beautifully to make sure nothing ever gets resolved. You know, you can use this distract, control method to create so much excitement that nobody really realizes. It's a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. And it's a bit like a magical trick. You're the masters of illusion here. But at the same time, you've got your Jupiter return as you're having your Saturn return. So this is really quite a magical time. So even though this is all playing out, roll up, because there's a whole new thing developing, a whole new distraction coming up to be welcomed and to be enjoyed. You know, so how you might up level this. I mean, you know, we are talking, this is the end of September. You've got 9 months to sort of prepare for this energy. And, you know, you could do a lot of stuff. One of the things I would start looking at is avoidance. Like, what are you avoiding? Because when you're avoiding something, you're not fully being yourself. And when you're not fully being yourself, you're not being intimate. You can't really have full intimacy if you're hiding something. So my invitation is to really listen in and to say, okay, well, what am I avoiding here? Because it's likely to come up around this time. And the chances are you're already feeling it. But just deepen into it. You're completely safe to go through the healing of this. You're really, really safe to do it. You've been through so much. What could possibly be worse than everything you've already gone through, all those changes and stuff? You know, this is the facing of your pain and the liberation of it. You know, this Saturn return could actually free all this up altogether, especially with your Jupiter return taking place at the same time. So that's a really big chart. Then if you're born with your Saturn in Pisces at 24 degrees, yes, your Saturn return is also conjunct Chiron. So that's even more so of the game that I was describing before. Really, really, truly played out. The Saturn return is also in opposition, to Uranus and Pluto. So like I said, it's really playing out. And it's also trine Neptune and Jupiter. Now that's nice. That's nice. So with these guys, what I would say, you absolutely want to use your big, generous and creative ideas. Let them really flow out. You know, do your healing journey through your creativity. Do your healing journey through benevolence and through altruism. Really allow the kindness and the caring and the higher self to really speak to you. You know, it's not there to fear. Now, another thing that's also taking place is Uranus is in opposition to Neptune, which I've already mentioned before. But yeah, it's still playing out. It's not quite so much as before, but you know, with Uranus in opposition to Neptune, you know, there's the possibility to shock yourself awake, shock yourself out of the slumber, shock yourself out of the big sleep or the romance of what you've been holding on to. So I really feel like I've almost already spoken about this pattern because I spent quite a lot of time on this Saturn return, which is obviously playing all these patterns out. What I would say actually is, even though for people born with Saturn in Pisces at 24 degrees, even though this return is more direct and extreme, I think the lesson here is so extreme that you're learning your lesson quite quickly. You know, it's not taking you a year either side to fully learn it. It feels really quite direct. Now, another thing that I want to share with all of you second Saturn return people in Pisces is the whole idea of responsibility and what's going on with the other generations. Because with these oppositions, they're showing us what's reflecting back to us through the people in our lives. So yeah, we've got our partners, we might have our children, we might also have grandchildren, and we might also have parents. So if you're on this side, like, it depends, like you might identify on both sides of these seesaws at both times, sometimes simultaneously. So you may well identify with the eternal victim. You may well see that, you know, you've been shouted at, you've been bullied at, you've been suppressed, you've learned lots of tricks and ways of coping with additional stress that's lumbered on you. And you may have taken on a lot of responsibility for other people's welfare, which I'm sure has happened. And at the same time, it looks like the people who you're taking on welfare for are controlling you through aloofness. You know, they're controlling you by being absent. And the control through absence is a really strong theme for this particular Saturn in Pisces generation. So it really starts here. It kind of starts around about 9 or 10 degrees. But anyone born, you know, with 9 or 10 degrees right the way through to late 20s in Saturn in Pisces, you know, from the 60s, they're playing this out, you know. So the control by being aloof may well be played back to you whilst you're feeling like you're taking care of everyone and trying to create the safe space. But consequently, you might feel manipulated by people that are asking you for extra care, like maybe criticizing the way you're parenting, or criticizing the way you were as a child, or criticizing you. You know, this is a real parent critical wound here, you know, where we're wounded by the behavior of our parents. Well, that's how it appears to be. And so you may well feel aloof to anyone that is triggering your childhood pain. And you might be doing both of these patterns at the same time. And so with Saturn returning to this point, it could almost, and this is my worry, for anyone that is in a relationship or in a family with somebody with one of these really, really strong patterns during their Saturn return, is that your reactions to your family around you, the people that love you for who you are, might be founded on the dysfunction of your childhood. And so you might be, you know, like, you can almost see that this is recipe for things maybe exploding or separating out, you know, a bit like the idea of a nuclear bomb that you see, and all of a sudden there's this mushroom cloud that goes far away, or a bit like the Roadrunner that kind of goes meep meep and then like legs it off into the future. The aloof drama, like getting control by being aloof, getting control by escaping, getting control by giving yourself lots of space. Whilst it works for you, it's coming from this dysfunction. And it looks like freedom, and it looks like spiritual freedom, but is it? And is there a way for you to know the difference? Is there a way for you to get really clear about it, so you know that it's coming from your spirituality, your spiritual perspective, and not from avoidance of pain? Whew. It's quite a lot there, isn't there? So last thing I want to talk about then, so I've been going at this for quite a while. I said I was going to talk back about like restructuring, trusting more, authority and power, responsibility, what you're facing. I would say people who are going through their second Saturn return, you know, you've already done this first time round and you've had all of these things triggered. I would imagine that, you know, in your first Saturn returns, you may have separated from families. You may have found new spiritual or philosophical movements that attracted you a lot more than a normal narrative playing life. You may have found a lot of freedom in your philosophies and things that aren't really from the narrative. Because if you think like Pluto and Uranus, there's a lot about consciousness there. And then Chiron as well is very much about consciousness and mastery. And then Saturn is about those tough lessons and what we take with it. I mean, your generation has come on in leaps and bounds in terms of, you know, bringing in a new consciousness and really wanting to create some change. but it's come at quite an expense. You've gone through a lot of hurt, and a lot of shaming, and as such, I think I've got some very good avoidance skills. So what I would say is, in claiming your power and in claiming your peaceful maturity that is coming from your second return, how can you be responsible about your freedom that you're claiming? Are you claiming it because of a dysfunction, or are you claiming it because it is the right thing to do? You know, what I would say is, as you're coming into this return, get really clear on that, because the second Saturn return should be a time when more money is flowing in, when you're feeling more stable, you know, that all of the work you've done, all the lessons you've learned are coming into roost. And if you've done it really well, it should be quite easy. You know, if you've managed to manage some of that conflict, or, you know, given the opposition that all of you face in your second Saturn return, I imagine there's lots of people you've had to cut out, possibly at a lot of pain. For those of you that are keeping people in your life that are not, and it's not working, you may well find that it will never work. And actually your second Saturn return is in the acceptance of that, and the claiming of putting yourself first might actually be the right thing to do. So it may well bring some restructuring, but facing up to the fear or the feeling that you have to run, or you have to be aloof, and you have to give yourself space, is a tricky one. I think you'll have more authority and more power. I do think space is good for you, but again, I think it's taking that space for the right reason, not because it's a dysfunction, not because it's coming from a place of avoidance. And when you're really coming from that place of non-avoidance and non-restriction, your authority and your power is going to go whoosh. You know, it's all going to come up. It's going to get stronger. This is a time for you to trust more. You know, when you get that instinct or that little tingle that you're being manipulated and things aren't quite right, you might want to look at that. There will be something that's true in that, but there'll also be something that's you in that needs healing. It's not all on the other person. It's not all about healing the other person, you know. So it's time to trust yourself more, like let go of what you're thinking, allow it to go, like trust that it's going to go. If you let go of your fight and flight, it's almost like your fight and flight is a little bit too oversensitive. And in your second Saturn return, what I'm actually seeing is a much truer and stronger structure forming. So it's forming because you're no longer going into these fight or flights. You're no longer needing these mechanisms to be able to cope with life. You're able to now actually build a structure. You know, you don't have to be homeless. You don't have to be continuously moving. You can actually start to stabilize and ground. So you're not just doing it in your spiritual. I mean, you know, it's very easy to say, well, you know, I just want to look at the higher side of life. I just want to be a spiritual person. But you are in a physical reality right now. So if you are using this energy to face yourself calmly and realize you've done nothing wrong and that no one's really against you, everyone's just dealing with their pain, and recognize where you're being aloof and avoidy and all that jazz. If you can face that first fear, you might never have to run away again. How cool could that be? You're okay. You really are okay. And for your first Saturn return people, in terms of restructure and responsibility, you guys have been born with this massive, not chip on your shoulder, but you've had the world put its massive chip on your shoulders. You know, from birth, you've had the responsibility of maybe being the generation that helps to solve the environment crisis or whatever crisis is coming up. You know, and you've been given the responsibility of learning to live differently. You've been told you're probably not going to have your own house. You probably have to house share or live in these new kind of complexes and new cities and this, that, and the other. You're being sold these ideas about this like brave new world. And if you don't do it, you're not taking responsibility. You're not taking a fair bit of your share. Personally, I think that's a crock of shit. Please don't cancel me, YouTube. I think that's really unimaginative to assume that the world is only going to survive if every single person pulls their weight and does the same thing at the same time. That sounds like there is no trust that we will be our own answer. And I think this is the big responsibility for you, is to realize, yes, you have responsibility. And whilst you're feeling the weight of the responsibility on your shoulders, you're probably not going to come up with the best solutions. But if you're feeling free and spontaneous and you've created space for yourself to think beyond what you've been told and investigate beyond what you've been told and to actually take some time. I mean, this is the thing with Saturn, is time is of the essence. Now, you've been raised in an environment where you've been told you have no time. I'm not entirely sure if that's actually true or not. But can you imagine what that does to the human psyche to be told you don't have time to find a solution? What creative solution's going to come up under those circumstances? Not much is going to come forwards. So I think the best gift you can actually give yourself around the time of the Saturn return is to actually give yourself some goddamn time. Give yourself some time. Take the yoke of responsibility off your shoulders for a minute. I don't think the world is going to collapse, no matter how many people are fear-mongering, saying it's going to happen, saying it's going to be happening. If you talk to your second Saturn returners, they will probably tell you the world has been ending the whole of their lives. And if you talk to your grandparents or great-grandparents who are having their third Saturn return, they will also say the same thing. Only now there is media, there's celebrity, there's Hollywood, there's internet, there's all these new ways to influence you and to push an idea that you are out of time. And the only thing now is to submit. Now, you guys have been born with a really creative mind, a really technical mind, an exciting mind, a mind that values freedom and truth. You don't get that by having it forced on you. You get that through direct experience. So take your time. Where you're feeling overly responsible, take it off for a while. Seriously, you can always pick it back up if and you might choose to add some guilt on if you want to make it harder for yourself. But I really recommend that you come into your own authority and your own power only when you've given yourself time to be creative. Because if you're doing it before you are getting creative, when you come into your power, you're going to do it in the form of a robot. You're going to be doing it based on numbers and matrices. You're going to be doing it in a rational way and not in a heart-led way. We are humans. We have beating hearts, and we should be treated like the solution comes not from rationality. I really don't believe that. It might come from rationality and the heart mixed together. But right now, if you take the responsibility on you without having the time to really explore things for yourself, you may well find that you're getting into a narrower and narrower tunnel. So for instance, I've already described that, Saturn return, it feels like the structure's coming in on you. It's like bearing down on you. And you're still in this place of growing your personality, growing your possibilities, growing the sense of your life. And you've got these like compounding energies around you. So yeah, that's your challenge. So the more you can do to create space for yourself, even if it's taking some time off, doing some study, doing some kind of world trip, I don't know, whatever it is you need to do to get some space. It might be you are in the wrong relationship, and I don't mean to poo-hoo that at all. I spent about 5 or 6 years grieving the ending of a really long relationship, and you can hear my sad story in Saturn in Pisces. And again, not to say my sad story and belittle what you're going through right now. When we come to an end of a relationship or an end of an identity, it's huge and you need time. So take off the stress and strain that you're putting on yourself. Take off your judgments. be around people that are non-judgmental, be around people that are going to be open to you grieving, or be open to you exploring, or be open to you expressing. Just give yourself the space and be kind to yourself. So anyway, I think that's the end. I feel like I'm all talked out, and maybe I'm getting a bit preachy now, so it's time to stop. But anyway, I hope that was helpful. So just to recap, what I've shared is 3 different positions within people going through their first Saturn return, and then 3 different positions of people going through the second Saturn return, and giving you some recommendations on how to manage power. If you have parents in the second Saturn return, or if you're a parent with a child going through their first Saturn return, work together. You've got equal and opposite patterns playing out right now, and they're best done in collaboration. You know, you could really help each other, but you can only do that if you are giving yourself the kindness and stepping away from the sort of very difficult Saturn judgment. But if you can get that beautiful Saturn kind of coherence and groundedness, you could really achieve some great results. Yeah. And last of all, like, if you would like to book an appointment with me to talk through your Saturn return, what your fears are, and how you would like to face up to what's going on in your chart, how you can take responsibility and start talking about how you can restructure and come into a better flow of trust in your life and a better flow of vulnerability, so that you can have true power, because that is what's on offer. I really believe that. Then just give me a shout. Okay. My details are below. Feel free to book an appointment. And yeah, let's see what happens. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed it, if you think it's helpful for anyone else, then please do feel free to share. Your likes, your comments and all that jazz really also helps me. It's good to know what's helpful, what's worked for you, what resonated, because that informs, future videos that I do for you. But anyway, so much love to you. Good luck with your return. And know that, life continues. We move beyond this, and in years to come, you might be talking to the next generation down about how you went through yours. But anyway, lots of love to you. Bye for now.